am Glaucia Rosas, co-founder and director at the EduTech Alliance. In this series of interviews, I am talking with key figures on the international EduTech scene to get their perspectives on how schools can really get themselves on track with their education technology. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this series of interview. Today, I have the honor to talk with Dr. Arnie Bieber. His work at the International School of Prague for the last 13 years has put this school on the map of the most innovative schools in the world. And he's seen as the driving force for this change. So he will share with us his story and his tips on school leadership and innovation. So Dr. Arnie, thank you so much for accepting this invitation and being here with us.
Thank you, Glaucia. Pleasure to be here.
So with the changes in the past year and a half, we have seen a lot of schools talking about innovation, but not knowing exactly how to accomplish that. We know that new schools that have this progressive pedagogy and use of technology in their DNA, they start in a different way. But most traditional schools will struggle to see themselves breaking some conservative practices to try new ideas and new methods. In your 13-year tenure as director of the International School of Prague, you have transformed one of Europe's oldest international schools into one of the most innovative learning organizations. So can you share with us a bit about this story and some tips on how to innovate in traditional schools?
That's a great question. And it's interesting you mentioned new schools. And as you said, International School of Prague is one of the oldest schools in Europe. We're over 70 years old. It was established in 1948, and we have over 900 students from 60 nationalities. So it's a very diverse community. And so whether you're an old school or a young school, it doesn't stop you from changing and innovating. And in terms of how we achieve that, and it's very much a we. I mean, yes, I'm the director of the school, but in order to implement any kind of change, it has to be a collaborative effort. And so just briefly, I will say that when I arrived at the school, the first task I had was to create a new mission, because the school was really in need of a new mission. I was tasked with doing that almost as soon as I touched the ground. I was coming from Bucharest, Romania, where I was the director of the American International School of Bucharest, so not too far away. And so we set about working on creating a new mission. And a mission is really about not just nice words on a wall. It's about a driving force, and it's about creating a vision. And so through a very inclusive process with all community members, students, parents, staff, teachers, we created this new mission, which is based on 3 pillars: to inspire, engage, and empower. And there's more that comes below that, but what I like to say to my community is that if you don't remember anything else, just remember those 3 words: inspire, engage, empower. Because we measure ourselves against the mission. The mission is our standard. So that was the first part of, most important part of the work. And really, it's going deeply into a conversation of what are we about? What are we really about as a school? What is our purpose? What is our why? Because you can't really affect change or develop further if you're not clear about your why. If you're not clear about your purpose, you'll move in all kinds of different directions. And so that whole process of creating a mission, the process of doing it was as important as the result of the actual mission of the school. And then since then, 13 years ago, we've set about everything that we do in the school, whether it's the curriculum, whether it's how we act to one another, any aspect of the school is based on the mission of the school. So for example, we decided years ago that our curriculum was not going to be a content-based curriculum, because content always changes as the world is changing more and more rapidly. And also content is widely available now more than ever. And so the curriculum of the school is a skills-based curriculum. It's a curriculum based on how you actually apply your learning, because to some extent, the content can change and be interchangeable even to some extent, but there are certain basic important skills and competencies and ways of being that are the deep learnings that we want kids to have. And so we built a curriculum based on the precepts of the mission of the school, and so that the content can continually be refreshed, but that the basics of what we're about and what we want for kids learning doesn't change. And so I would say that the most important thing, in order to be, frankly, any kind of school, but certainly if you want to push the envelope and break the mold, if you will, and really look to the future, which is what ISP tries to do, you have to be very clear about your why and your purpose, and doggedly stick to that. Always come back to that, because that will always help you self-correct and be really clear about why you're doing what you're doing.
I think that's exactly what I've got from looking at the school's website and even your website. I've read this very inspiring phrase where you said that your job is to bring the school mission to life, and you accomplish that by with your strategic plan to unleash. I'm gonna quote that now. So to unleash your collective potential, so that you as a community can achieve greater results than the sum of the parts. So I thought that was very inspiring. Creating this vision and with all the community and bringing them together. This is what's going to make this push this forward for definitely. So you mean that having this strategy collectively constructed and shared amongst the community is the way to improve the schools? Is that correct?
Yes. So in order to create a meaningful strategy, it has to be within the context of your community, obviously. And the way we set about doing this strategic work, and I've done many versions of strategic planning. What I've learned about strategic planning is all too often it becomes operational very quickly. It actually often isn't aspirational or ambitious, because often the goals that are set, the strategies and the strategic goals are goals you're going to achieve. Mm-hmm. So building a new building, you're going to do that. You have the plans, you're going to work, and you're going to build it. That to me is not strategy. That's important operational goals that have to be achieved. Strategy is about having an ambitious, mission-driven, aspirational set of goals that the school is going to work towards, that the community is going to work towards, that you are not guaranteed to achieve. In fact, the way we structure our goals is that they are at a high level, so that over the time that we are trying to implement the strategy, we can be agile, we can shift how we approach it, so that as we look at our progress, we will adjust it, not simply check the box because we did this project or we did that project. For this strategy, which we called ISP 2020, and now it's 2021. And so the school's embarking on a new strategic process. But the strategy that we had been working towards is about unleashing your collective potential so that we as a community, as you said, are greater than the sum of our parts. And then there are 5 strategies connected to that overarching objective. They are about being change makers, about being creative thinkers, about being curious in one's learning, about coherence, so that creating coherence across the school, and about bringing that whole school community together. And each year we've come up with different ideas and initiatives to move those strategies forward. And frankly, like the mission, you never get there. You make progress, you get further along, and then you review and you say, okay, this should change, or we should continue with this work. But it's as long as it's always built on the mission of the school, that progress can continue to happen.
Definitely. And then everyone can work in the same direction, because we do
Exactly.
We talk to many schools at the EduTech Alliance, and the schools that do not have this strategic plan, what happens is we see they have lots of projects, sometimes great projects, but they are not set in the same direction. So it takes longer for them to achieve whatever they're trying to achieve. So having this exercise of building one solid strategy, or at least aligning everything to one direction, is definitely going to make a change in the plans.
Mhm.
One of the things that I saw also in your website, and we've talked about, is your learning innovation hub. So one important skills of educational leaders nowadays is to inspire a culture of innovation and collaboration that allows the time and the space to explore and experiment with these digital tools. So I believe this is what you were saying when you mentioned that you're trying to break free from only content-based curriculum and try skills-based learning. So your school has launched this learning innovation hub. Can you tell us a bit about that space and what are you hoping to achieve there?
Well, it's interesting because, well, I'll tell you a few things. Firstly, ISP has piloted many different kinds of learning spaces during my time at the school. And our philosophy, again, connecting to the mission, is that when we look at learning space design, is that we're looking at it as a pilot for future development in the school. So if we build one, for example, in the early childhood part of the school, we created this Reggio-inspired environment to really engender collaborative work for kids and learning, and to have more greater autonomy and to experiment. So that's a prototype for other spaces. And so then once we built that and we looked at what worked and what didn't work, we expanded that to other areas, taking on board what we learned from that space. We've done that over and over again throughout the school. And so by the time we created this Learning Innovation Hub, formerly the library, and we call it the hub, by the time we designed that, and that took about a year to design, it was based on all that we learned from other spaces that we created, as well as what we call our learning principles. What does learning look like at ISP, and what kind of learning do we want to see happening in these spaces? And so all of those things come before the design of the space. One of the challenges schools often have is that they build something beautiful, and then they figure out whether it worked or not, as opposed to the other way around. So we're very clear about, again, the purpose and what we believe about learning. And then we have tried to create spaces all around the school that match our vision of learning. And that has to do with flexible environments, environments that are conducive to collaboration, and as well as autonomy, and having a flow so that it's not conducive to the teacher standing in front of the room talking at the kids, but it's about active experiential learning. So we took the original library space, we expanded it to 2 floors, and we created this flexible learning environment. Yes, there are still books in the hub, so that certainly is an important aspect of what we think is important for kids. But what we also did was, right in the middle of the library, as soon as you walk in, there's this glass enclosed area that you can see from outside and you can see from inside the library that we call the Idea Lab. And the Idea Lab is a space for creating. It's like partially a maker space, so it's got lots of technology like, laser cutters and 3D printers, but it also has sewing machines. It's got, a whole range of analog and digital kinds of equipment. And it's set up with lots of tools and drawers, and we've got 3 tech coaches in the school that all work together in that same room. So they are able to collaborate, even though one is focused on elementary, one is focused on middle, and one is focused on upper school, but it's a collaborative team. And the idea is that we can schedule multiple groups to come in and work at the same time because it's a big enough space. So you might see 5-year-olds working on one project with the robotics team working on the other end of the room. And it's also a drop-in space so that people, just as they go into a library environment, we wanted to extend the concept of library, this learning hub, so that it's not only about looking at books or researching, it's also about creating, and that the experts are there and available to help you do that. And then on the 2nd floor of the library, we created this space for primarily the upper school students, the high school students, to collaborate, to work, to study quietly, but again, to have this flexible environment where they can be connected to the library, but at the same time have their own area. And so far it's worked great. However, I will say that, as you know, because of the pandemic, almost as soon as we completed it, we had to close down for a while. Thankfully, over the past month or so, we've reopened completely, and the place is alive with kids of all ages.
This is great, and I would like to have another interview just for that, because I think it's an amazing project, and that I think every school should have that, so that this sort of hub. But as you're saying, when you created this hub, that you were prototyping, experimenting, this shows me that this comes with I mean, you were the head of school, and you and your team obviously created this, but in order for you to do that, you had to have an open mindset, like growth mindset, and be open to various ideas, to allow testing, allow error.
Mm-hmm.
This is innovation. So how do you promote? And this is off our questions, but how do you make sure you promote this innovation in your school? Because I think this is very, very like impressive, and this should happen in all schools.
A really wonderful question. In order to move forward as a school, and schools are very challenging environments for a lot of reasons. I mean, they're often pretty tradition bound and very conservative, and it's sort of easier to stay the same than to change. As someone once said, parents aren't clamoring for change, so why should we change? And the reality is that we have to do what's in the best interest of kids. And we know that the learning needs to be relevant and connected to the real world. So in terms of how does that happen, how do you create that? Firstly, we say that ISP is a place of possibilities. And that is pertinent to me as a director, but it's the same message goes to the people who clean the school, or the drivers, or the security guards, obviously the teachers and the students. So if we say inspire, engage, empower, when we talk about empowerment, it's about providing for professional autonomy, where people understand, where the educators understand what our learning principles are, they understand what the framework of the school is, but within that, they are accomplished professionals, and there are lots of different ways for them to deliver it. If someone is standing over their shoulders and instructing them how to do it, it really limits their creativity and their effectiveness. So the message from every corner of the school, the same to parents, and parents come up with all kinds of great initiatives as well, is that as one community, we're a place of possibilities. And then we have certain structures and systems in place to try to support that. So, for example, one of the things that we've created for faculty the shorthand is called LIFTs, Learning Inquiry Focus Teams. And the idea behind LIFTs is that everyone in the school, every educator, needs to come up with a professional inquiry. And the professional inquiry is a question where you say to yourself, if I try this, here's what I think will happen. And then I'm going to try it. I'm going to collect evidence and see if it did happen, what worked, what didn't work. And everyone's encouraged to come up with these questions and understand that it's perhaps more often than not, it won't work out. And they will make mistakes, or they will learn from doing that. And some folks might feel like, well, you're experimenting on kids. But in fact, it's the opposite. It's about innovation. I like to use the analogy of a hospital. You don't want hospitals working with patients from what the practice was 50 years ago. Well, you shouldn't want that from schools either. Unfortunately, schools often are afraid to change their practice, except on the edges. So we encourage every teacher and ask every teacher and expect every teacher to have a professional inquiry, and then to choose other teachers that they want to work with in a team, so they have critical friends who can listen to what's happened with them, what worked, what didn't work, and looking at the evidence that they've created. So there's a lot of choice for the teacher. We don't tell them what the question is. We don't tell them who they have to work with. But they do need to work with someone, at least one other person to collaborate with. And then another piece of that structure is that instead of having an evaluation process at ISP, which is again, sort of your traditional appraisal method, and there's plenty of research to show that they're not very effective.
Yeah.
It's checking boxes, and it's window dressing. It looks good, but it doesn't really lead to any growth.
Yeah.
We have something called a professional growth model, and the professional growth model, where the principal is working with the teachers and vice versa, is based on the professional inquiry. So basically, I'm a teacher. Here's my inquiry question. If I'm working with kids, I don't know, on reading, let's say in elementary school, and I want to try out this new approach because I'd done research and I believe it can really support learning, I'm going to start doing that, and I'm going to collect evidence, and then that will be the conversation that I'm having with the principal. We are talking about my professional inquiry, not, as I said, more of an evaluative checkbox. And the reason we feel we can do that is because we know that we hire very highly accomplished teachers. So if the vast majority of those teachers already know what they're doing, what's the added value? And the added value is them feeling like they can take chances, they can take risks, they can prototype, try out new ideas, and then learn from them, and do that with partners of other teachers as well as with the principal.
And
that's one example.
No, this is amazing. You're basically doing everything that you expect, children to do, innovate, to think of, being lifelong learners. You're doing this with teachers, so you're cultivating the same as you expect from children. And which is funny because nowadays we see a lot of the competencies that kids need to develop. So it's communication, collaboration, and love. But then you don't allow any other area of the school to live up to the same expectations. So you want them to collaborate, but you don't collaborate with teachers, or you don't allow them to collaborate or innovate, and so on. So it's great that you can have this. It's a learning organization. A school should be a learning organization, correct?
Yes, as Peter Senge said many years ago in the fifth discipline, he wasn't even talking about schools. He was saying any competent or effective organization needs to be a learning organization. And that couldn't be truer than for schools. And I'm completely with you that is really the bread and butter of what we're about. One of the things, you can't have a double standard. You can't say, we want children to be risk takers, but we adults, we're not going to take any chances. We're not going to take any risks. The reason we want kids to be risk takers, because as we well know, that's how you learn. You try something, you learn from it. If someone just tells you something, you don't learn. You have to do it and try it. And so professionals need to do that as well. It needs to be done in a informed way. So it's not, I'm just going to try anything. It's like, I have reason to believe that if I do this, I've done my research. If I try this, it will lead to kids learning more effectively. And so I'm going to try it for that reason. And I've created an inquiry that I can document and back up. But absolutely, the adults need to be willing to take risks, not just the kids.
Definitely. And from what you're saying, I think your school probably navigated this past year and a half well. So I read in your blog recently that in just a few months, because of the pandemic, the schooling playbook, how we do school, has drastically been changed, probably forever. So how did you navigate over this period? What worked and what did not work that you can share with other leaders and use it and adapt in their schools?
Yeah, this has been a challenge for schools around the world. Everything I've described about ISP has put us in a very strong position to take on this new challenge. So that's something I'm very thankful for. And the professionals who work at the school have been amazing. They have turned on a dime because they've had to, and teachers have had to do that around the world. We have a lot of technology in the school already, so a lot of those kinds of challenges are pretty well taken care of. We have one-to-one laptop or iPads throughout the school, so kids already have their own devices. And so, which they have at school, but they also can take home and do have it at home as well. So those kinds of things, the hardware side was already really in place. And the teachers are very technically adept as well. So, and so are the kids. So the turnaround did not take very long. There was a lot of obviously very quick planning involved. And we definitely learned as we went along. Excuse me. So yes, we also had to take chances and try things in different ways and learn from it. We had to have a feedback loop. So we were constantly asking questions of the parent community and the kids. If there were younger kids, also more important to hear back from the parents in the sense that they were watching their young children learn. Think about doing online learning for 3- and 4-year-olds.
I have that example in my house, so yes, I know.
Okay, you know better than I do.
Yes, it's really hard.
It's very hard, and we have very experienced teachers who constantly were iterating and creating and recreating and trying out different ideas. So it's not so much what worked and what didn't work. It's more that it's this constant iteration, constantly looking at what we're doing and how might we change it. How are we grouping kids? What's the best way to get them to be interacting with their peers? So it's not more of a one direction delivery of learning. How to engage parents where they have some level of involvement, especially depending on the age group. But at the same time, getting them separate from their kids, because that's what we want kids to take responsibility for their learning. It's a little bit trickier for a 3-year-old at home, for a parent not to be around. That could even be dangerous. Yes. But even there, it's possible. It's about working very closely with the parents. So we tried different kinds of groupings, and some worked better than others. And one of the things we learned is that we have to be in a positive learning, what we call the silver linings, is more than ever before, and something we've known, is this idea that you need to customize the learning. It's not one size fits all. You have a class of 20 kids, the delivery can't be one size fits all. And in this environment, this Zoom environment, it actually lent itself to paying more attention to the individual learning needs of every student. And so there was kind of a way, an attempt to figure out how to make the learning more customizable and really fit the needs of the learner. And also we were forced to listen even more than we normally would to what the learning experience was like, either from kids or from parents. And so that constantly allowed us to keep changing and so on. Some examples I can think of is that we started off kind of more strictly following the schedule, especially in middle and upper school, because we have a schedule, we have a block schedule. And that we realized kids needed more time in between classes, for example, and we needed more flexibility. We needed to encourage teachers. It's not necessarily advisable to fill up every moment of that class time in that way. You need to provide for a lot more flexibility. And you are the one to make the decision and the judgment about when kids need a break, when they need downtime, because it is exhausting. It can be draining doing this all day. And, we adults complain about Zoom sometimes and things like that. It's a lot harder for kids. Yeah. Just as, school, I think, is harder for kids than the world of work in many ways. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever shadowed a student, it's something that we've done at ISP many times. You spend a full day just partnering with an identified student, and you just spend the whole day with them. You're exhausted by the end of the day. That's when school's in person. Yeah. And, on a digital environment, it's really tiring. And so we need to be thinking about all those things, the need for kids to interact with each other, and for the teachers to take their creativity and initiative taking to the next level because of the necessity of that in this environment. And then my hope is that this will continue, not Zoom, although there's a place for that as well, or whatever the digital platform is. We should learn from that and how we can leverage that. But instead, what are the good things that have come out of this that can we can continue to apply. How can we break down the schedule so that it's not this sort of siloed subject areas moving from one to the next? How do we make things flow more, make it more organic? And I think there's hope that some of those things can be an outcome of the time we're spending in this environment. Now, I may have veered off, so I'm not sure I fully answered your question.
Oh, you did. And I'm just, I'm just flying here. I'm going with my imagination. As you're saying, I'm just imagining a school day and so on.
Yeah.
But I think this is great. And as you're saying about the digital experience and the physical, face-to-face experience, we also talk to schools where they have started reproducing everything just like if they were in school. But that didn't last long. That was great to start and make everyone feel comfortable that the schooling was happening. But they were exhausted because when you shadow a kid during the day, everything is stressful, in certain ways. But also they have these break times with their friends, and I think this makes a huge difference. So teachers, if you can find ways to reproduce this social side of schooling online because they can't be in school, this is definitely important.
And that was one of the biggest challenges. And, in addition, we sort of created, I wouldn't say a new mission, but another set of priorities that didn't go against our mission, but three other words: not inspire, engage, empower, but specifically catered to this challenge of the pandemic. And that is wellness, learning, and belonging. So our three sort of pillars during this whole time. And again, it's something that we always refer back to. Where's the wellness? Are we helping people take care of their well-being? And we weren't always successful. Honestly, and often, we've worried about the families and the kids as well as our employees. They've been exhausted and also feeling isolated, especially in an international setting. Many of them are not from here. But the wellness was so important. Obviously, learning is central, and that we wanted that to continue. And then that is based on our learning principles. And then finally, a sense of belonging. We pride ourselves in being this welcoming community. How do we create a sense of belonging like this? Yeah. And we've tried all different kinds of things, and the parents did as well. So for example, one night they initiated, we have something called the School Community Association, which is like the PTO, parent teachers organization. And they initiated a virtual wine tasting, where everybody, they found a vendor, everyone ordered wine and food. It was delivered to everyone's home. And then everyone sat around, and there was the sommelier basically led us in a wine tasting as one community. And we've had other kinds of events like that, just finding ways to come together as a community, even if it has to be virtually. Thankfully, what I'm really looking forward to is the school year ends next week. And typically at the end of school, like at the beginning of school, we bring out our entire school community outside together to celebrate the beginning and celebrate the end. We haven't been able to do that physically. We are going to do that next week on our sports field. All of the kids and the teachers are going to come together outside, wearing masks, unfortunately, but still together. And we haven't done that for almost 2 years. So that sense of belonging is very, very important.
I think it's going to be a very special moment, probably a very impactful moment for everyone's. Especially you're leaving the school now. Yes. So this is going to be a closing, a very challenging year. So I think this moment is going to be very emotional.
It is going to be, but I'm looking forward to being together with everyone.
Yes. And still in this topic, I read an interview you wrote for Pioneering Schools, when you mentioned that schools will either die a slow death or rise like a phoenix, and to be reborn. And you mentioned that they need a new paradigm. So can you tell us a bit about that? What is working and what is not working in schools? That they must change to rise like the phoenix, in your opinion?
Yeah, that was very dramatic words, I realize, but I believe it strongly. For too long, schools have been based on compliance. Compliance meaning that students need to do what they're being told to do, and the teachers need to be told what they need to do. And it doesn't. Just to be clear, I'm not talking about guidance and mentoring and collaboration and all of those very important things. We have a lot to offer kids. And schools as physical places are extremely important. That social interaction. If we ever took it for granted before, we should no longer take for granted how important that physical contact and interaction is. So we don't want to lose that side of school. We want to maintain that. We want to deepen that side of school. But we know a lot about learning, and we know that learning is not about memorization and rote learning and being told and given information that you need to memorize. Learning is about experiencing learning. We know that you need to construct your own understanding of learning in order to really learn. But for centuries, schools have been about compliance. They've been about jumping through hoops. They've been about passing tests and getting grades. And all of that is about control, and it has very little to do with learning. An A in something doesn't necessarily mean you deeply understand it. It means that you passed a series of tests often. And so we're shooting ourselves in the foot. One of my heroes, in addition to Peter Senge, is David Perkins from Harvard Project Zero, really amazing thinker. And he talks about life-worthy learning, what's worth learning. And, about 10 years ago, he was being interviewed and he said something like 90% of it's kind of a strong thing to say. He said 90% of the curriculum is a waste of time. Think about that. If that were half true, it would be of great concern. And he knows he's someone who's thought deeply about this topic, and I have as well. If you look at the curriculum, this thing that we require kids to learn, they have to study algebra and geometry and quadratic equations and so on. To what extent do kids understand why they're learning what they're learning? If they raise their hand and they ask the teacher, why am I learning this? The answer shouldn't be it's on the test, or it's in the curriculum, or you have to graduate, or you have to go to university. Those things might be true. Mm-hmm. Some of those things might be true. So we do the International Baccalaureate diploma. The better you do on the International Baccalaureate, the better chances you have to get into certain universities. We don't ignore those things. That's important, and we have to deliver that for kids. But we don't want to make a virtue out of a necessity. So if there are certain things we have to do, then we will do them, and we will do them well. And our students do very well in the IB, for example. But we shouldn't fool ourselves. I mean, the IB is a pretty good curriculum, but we need to look deeply at the curriculum, and we need to look at the mode of learning. How do kids learn in school? As I mentioned earlier, we still, even though we're a fairly flexible, progressive school, kids are still moving from one subject to the other, certainly in middle and upper school especially. So they go from math to science to social studies. It's very, in that sense, pretty traditional. A lot of the teaching and pedagogy that happens in those subjects is much further along the continuum of being a progressive school. But it's still that approach to learning. And so I believe that the learning, kids need to see the learning as highly relevant and connected to the real world. And understanding the fact that in this day and age, kids can easily look up lots of things. They can Google it. They can watch experts in YouTube videos, as we well know. There's so many ways so they don't need schools for that. Schools are, as we like to say, no longer monopolies, mm-hmm. a monopoly of knowledge. The knowledge is freely available to everybody. Now, guiding kids to know how to mm-hmm. understand and find information or concepts or learn about different things, that is an important role of school, to guide kids and to help them understand how to navigate the world that we're in. Is hugely important for schools. But that's not necessarily the focus of most schools, because we have to deliver the curriculum. Yeah. And so one of the big
time, that specific
say again?
time. in that specific time, in that specific way.
Right. Exactly. So how do you change that? For one thing, one of my favorite slogans is less is more. The curriculum does not have to have so much content in it. Because if we really can go deeply with kids and learning in different ways, there's all kinds of content that they can apply to their learning. But we have to make the learning real. We have to make the mathematics, even if you're talking about the foundational literacies. In the States, we talk about the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. Yes, kids need to still have those basic foundations. But I believe if that's all we achieve, we failed as schools, because the foundational literacies are just that, they're foundational and important. But when as kids grow and develop, what directions can we help them go in? There's so many different avenues they can take. And so I think it's kind of like creating new foundations for kids being in the 21st century. So it's about freeing up, it's about creating more autonomy, it's about trusting kids, trusting in the sense that they can be more autonomous, that they can be empowered to take responsibility for their own learning, that there can be a lot more about guidance and mentoring as opposed to telling, as opposed to saying, everyone has this requirement, everyone go home and do this homework. That doesn't really meet the needs of each learner. And school should be exciting. It should be this place of wonder. It should be fun and exploration. And often it's not, because there are hoops we need to jump through. And there are lots of hoops that are self-imposed, especially as an international school. We're not required to follow a national curriculum. And our curriculum is our curriculum. As I mentioned earlier, we created our own curriculum. Yes, it draws from many different other curriculum around the world, but it's what we think is most valuable. And so schools have the ability to do that. I think there's a lot of fear. And the fear is about, what will the parents say, for example? And or what?
What if I fail, right? There is this
yes, yeah,
fear of
which
failing.
is, and I think we were talking the other day, and the reality is, what does the world of work look like? If I'm employing people, I'm looking for people who are willing to take risks, calculated, informed risks, to make things better, to give them the time to be creative. They're looking for creative individuals. So it's even, it's a question of bringing parents along as partners. That's one of the dangers that schools have, is that parents, you stay home, we'll tell you what's going on, come in for the parent-teachers meeting, and we'll let you know if your child is having problems. But other than that, really, it should be at a distance. One of the things we do at ISP is we bring parents into the school a lot. Parents are all normally, not now because of COVID, but normally parents are all over the campus. They're really partners in their kids' learning. We have something called the Edge in Education, where parents are hearing about where we're going as a school and engaging with that and questioning. We want them to be critical friends for what the school is doing, but we can't make change around parents or around the board or around, it's got to be with them. And we have to be able to answer questions and convince and educate people about why we're doing what we're doing. If we can't do that, then we probably shouldn't be doing it.
Sure. Yes, education is not the area of specialization of the parents. We have to guide them as well, not only students, but we have to guide them on what's meaningful education, what's important today. So it's not, connecting with parents is not just about how your son or your daughter is doing in school. It's what schooling is about, and building that partnership, definitely.
And they often see that in their own work. So outside of school, somehow school has a different set of rules from other environments. But even in their own work, they'll see a lot of that. But somehow there's a fear. But I think the fear is as much within as it is without. So it's not, there's a fear about what certain groups will say, or certain constituents, how they'll react. But often that's a fear based out of ignorance. And that's why that engagement with these communities, with parents, and having those kinds of conversations are really important.
Yes. very inspiring. That's all I can say. I could talk with you for a month, but I know you have a school to run in the last week of lessons, so I kind of have to let you go. But Dr. Arnie, it has been a real honor to have you here. Thank you so much for sharing those experiences and all this great baggage, this information, rich information that you have. I wish the school all the success, and we don't know what you're heading towards, but I'm sure it's going to be amazing, and you're going to do an amazing job anywhere you go. But again, thank you so much for participating in this interview, and I hope to talk to you again in another opportunity.
And Glaucia, it was really a pleasure to chat. You asked great questions, and I can see how committed you are to moving schools into the future. And, you know, we need to find partners around the world who are willing to do that. So thank you as well.
Thank you. Hopefully this interview will help building in that direction.
Yeah, I hope so.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bieber.